Broadcasting live from Tehran, Iran, thanks to our generous new subsidies. And, we have great new facilities. It's all thanks to not Raid Shadow Legends, but we're now sponsored by the Iranian government. So this is actually subversive now. Cool. Broadcasting live from Tehran, Iran. It's Radio Free Stirajavoy. We're going to talk about the assassination of Qassem Soleimani. It's kind of a, I would say it's like an emergency episode, but we're also like coming back to our regularly scheduled programming. So it's just an episode. We're going to have to push back the World War II episode because we have a new war. Well, kind of a war. Anyway, we'll talk about that.
The threat of war.
Yeah, I'm Bang Bang Duck, and we're going to go around and introduce ourselves because we got like 5 people today.
Hello, I am Chris. You might know me as the Gay Space Gulag, which is a dumb username, but hello, this is me.
Yeah, I'm Ethan. I usually go by Crack on the internet. I don't know. I'm not too ubiquitous, but I think I've been on here once before.
Hello.
I'm Vil, or at Left Commentary.
Hi, I'm Ilita. You follow me on Twitter at Brut Impact. Excuse me. I'm going to do another take on that.
Yeah, all right. So, we leave those in, right?
Yep. Yep. We're just gonna, we're just gonna leave it to the viewers to edit that out. So
just
forget that ever happened.
Like war crimes.
All right. So they did some real gangster shit, right? They assassinated Qassem Soleimani.
Yeah.
A real gangster.
I send one of ours to the hospital. We sent 2 of those to the morgue. In this case, it was Qassem Soleimani, head of Al-Quds Force, and an unnamed, or probably he had a name, I just don't know it, Hezbollah commander.
That was reported, but there's been a whole lot of because it's such, it bleeds, it leads. There's not a lot of fact checking going on.
Mm-hmm.
They reported initially a Hezbollah commander was killed, but one person who has been identified as being killed was Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis. He's one of the commanders of Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, which is their state-sponsored militia sort of organization trying to get all of the neighborhood watch groups into one chain of command during the war against the Islamic State.
Yeah, I think that's the pro-Iran militia. There's multiple national militias, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's the Iran-aligned one.
Yep.
All right. So I think Iran has just now called this an act of war. But I think it's interesting that they don't say, the United States is now at war with Iran. They're very particularly, no one says that anymore. So I don't think...
Well, we're in permanent war anyways.
Yeah.
If Iran were to say that they are at war with Iran, there would probably be a very bad incident following that. So I think it's yeah. I mean, what was it? Maduro said the same thing, that this is an act of war, and all leaders who are at the what's the word I'm thinking of? The other
Juan Guaido.
What happened to him?
I don't know.
They forgot
all the leaders at the end of the barrel of the United States will always say that this is an act of war without any further explanation, because they know if they take one step further that they will be most likely wiped out. But I think Iran is a much different case than a country like Venezuela, because they have actual regional power, something that Venezuela really doesn't. Also North Korea. Iran has power in Iraq, and it has its militias in Yemen, and it has state power in Lebanon. So this is a real regional power which threatens American imperialism. But I think the question that we need to speak about is what is our stance on that imperialism, American imperialism, but also Iranian imperialism, because Iran here is exporting finance capital. That is what it's doing. It is gaining political and economic power in other countries for its own gain as a nation state. So I hope a big part of the discussion today will be on that, talking about that.
I mean,
Thank you.
obviously we're for it in all cases.
I'd like to just start this off with some real quick breaking news. Pete Buttigieg just released his statement on the killing of Soleimani, and basically it says that he respects Trump's decision, but he would have given it some thought first. So that's what we need in the White House.
All of these fucking people are the same. Like they would be like, obviously Soleimani was an awful human being and the worst terrorist in the world, but maybe we should just be a little less reckless with our imperialism. Like, shut the fuck up. It's the same thing from all of them.
No, dude, you don't understand.
Yeah.
If you think about killing a man before you kill him, all right, it's less bad somehow.
I'm going to go on the record
Isn't that
here.
malice of forethought? Did you think about it beforehand?
I'm going to go on the record here and say that I'm kind of cool with this new way of waging war, where we just drone strike each other's generals. It seems fine to me, right? Like, I mean, Qassem Soleimani was like whatever, the Iranian,
Is the head of their
living martyr or whatever.
Yeah.
What's
The
going on?
Quds Force is definitely not a group of nice people.
Yeah, like it is one of those places where it's like, it's funny that they just ganked him, but like this is very much between an inter-bourgeois conflict. I mean, I hope we don't actually end up boots on the ground fighting in Iraq and Iran for.
It is refreshing for the generals to be dying for once.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of it, U.S. government.
It's a
civilians.
It's
like enemy commanders.
It's a huge step that America has done. It's usually kind of escalated in a well, I don't know how to phrase it correctly, but a kind of a slower fashion. But it's kind of just jumped the gun here.
Oh yeah,
and just fucking weird. Murdered a top general.
Just fucking blew their load immediately.
Yeah. Well, this is funny because like for a long time it's been super taboo to kill each other's generals because of class solidarity, right? You know, your upper command comes from the upper class, you know, and even if it's the better way to, even if it's more strategically viable, you know, you don't shoot the general because, you know,
they're gonna leave the rabble leaderless, and then
you went to school. You went to school together, right? Like,
worked in my 9-to-5 job, sitting behind a computer screen, just popping enemy generals.
Yeah, I mean Xbox controller.
I think that's actually a very interesting point about the ruling class's class solidarity. Like that is something that you would have never seen 100 years ago in the First Imperialist War, where there was some quote unquote degree of honor in combat. And obviously, that's kind of a more of a myth, especially with the atrocities of the First Imperialist War.
Well, honor has already been dead for a long time.
Yeah,
barely even existed in the first place.
Oh yeah.
We got Yamamoto. I'm not sure if there's many other. Like the Soviets would kill generals if they captured them, right? Sometimes.
Generally speaking.
Did they kill Paulus?
Not if they captured.
No, they didn't kill Paulus because he wrote a bunch of letters, if I remember correctly.
What they would do is they would definitely kill them if they couldn't capture them, and the Germans were the exact same with Soviet generals. I think there were several, even 4-star generals who died in combat on the Eastern Front.
Yeah, what's his name? Clement Voroshilov was like Commissar of Defense, was fighting outside of Leningrad with a pistol against German tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Which is probably the coolest thing Clement Voroshilov ever did.
Yeah, it definitely peaked there.
Peak. I mean, honestly, if you're fighting a war, it is pretty good. That just like if you're able to capture generals.
Yeah, because then you can like Andrei Vlasov them. Anyway, when it comes to the drone, I guess they just drone striked him. Yeah, just a drone strike on a civilian target in
airport
in Iraq.
And they didn't just do it once. They fucking double tapped that conflict.
Yeah, when they waited for civilians to go back and check the damage of the initial bombing. Yeah, of course.
How many people died in the strike?
I'm not sure of them both. Yeah.
Holy shit!
Apparently, it's like 16.
I'm sure they can't find some of them. they waited for people to go back and check the wreckage, and then they double tapped it.
Which
So
is
the fucking terrorist
which
who's
is
lost.
fucking insane, right? Like it's an assassination, right? Not a terror bombing. Are they
Yeah.
just so inured, like so jacked into the?
Look.
Well, and I think
they
that's
really
part
want
of-
to bomb the shit out of people. Like,
I think
because-
they have definitely decided that there is no line between terror bombing and assassination. For all we talk about fighting terrorists, but we definitely weaponize the notion of terror in the combating of that.
well, you see, it's
Yeah.
okay
In
if
the
the state
sense
does
of-
terror, all right?
You know, this charnel house, this prison house of nations that we live in called the United States.
It's because they got the Halo multiplayer voice guy to do all the audio for the drone pilots.
Double kill.
Killtrocity.
Slayer.
Genie Mania.
Shady me.
Yeah. It's like
War
Killer
crime.
there's really nothing that
Right,
can
right.
really describe the phenomenon other than terror of what
Yeah,
people
no.
living in these countries experience. Like they're not letting their kids play outside on cloudless days for fear that maybe if they ever gather on a cloudless day, they might get mistaken for like a terrorist training camp, and they'll get a bunch of Hellfire anti-tank missiles shoved up their ass.
Yeah, for anyone unaware, by the way, there's like they just let the drones like they just have like the kill list, and it's just algorithmically like generated, and you'll get killed for random shit, just like your height or whatever. Like, oh yeah, he's 5'9", just like one of the terrorists. Let's bomb him. Like
The
it's
war
that
against
absurd.
manlets continues.
Manlet detected.
They'll never see
Terrorism-
me. I'm too short.
Terrorism is defined as the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. The American military, it's funnily enough said by the supreme leader of Iran himself, the American military is the largest terrorist force on earth.
But isn't it lawful if it's legal?
Yeah, it's lawful, right?
It's lawful,
Well,
yeah. And
Yeah. Anything that, you know, when you try to qualify the use of power, violence, and terror based on law or unlawfulness is a bad definition.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're really just giving him the legitimacy of a state. But
If you think about it, laws are just a cope for the state.
cope.
Cope.
Yeah.
Oh, you bombed Iraq. Cope.
So
Well,
the question really asks, what happens here? I mean, you killed the head of the Quds Force. He's been immediately replaced by his deputy commander.
And it's
Nothing
not like
really
the
changed.
institutional knowledge. I think this man was killed by liberal great man theory, because there's the legend of the great leader of Al Quds Force, Qassem Soleimani. He looks like whatchamacallit. He looks like Sean Connery. He's whatever.
Connery.
But
Yeah, he does.
there's like
Does.
institutional knowledge. The reason why the
see
Iranian
this
military has
guy.
been successful in the Middle East is because these people are hardened. There's a chain of command. They have strong cybernetics, like integration of people into systems with the technology they have access to.
Oh my
They have
God,
a
he does.
clear strategic vision, and
they
that's
train
what's
people very effectively.
yeah. And you just need a guy at the top who's basically competent to be able to move this machine around. And Qassem Soleimani was basically competent and able to move that machine around. And now he's dead, and they find a new guy, right? But he wasn't like
Someone
And
who
you saw
served
this
with
with-
him for decades. So, someone who's
Yeah.
been shadowing him for his entire career. So, presumably has the same base of knowledge as him.
yeah, and you absolutely see this with like you saw this like in the different direction with David Petraeus back in like the 2000s, 2
Mhm.
decades ago.
Shut up. 2 decades.
And where he was like lionized. Everyone was like, David Petraeus is gonna win us the war. I had a copy of Time magazine. I think I might have talked about this before, but it was like David Petraeus is gonna save the world. David Petraeus is gonna win the war in Iraq in 2007, and then he had sex with a journalist and dipped, and now he's like, I don't know what he's even doing anymore.
I'm
Still
gonna look
having
it up.
sex with journalists.
Let's
Anyways,
see.
you
Oh, wait,
were
hold
all right. He
on.
does look like Sean Connery.
General David Petraeus reacts to Qassem Soleimani's killing Let's see what he has to say.
All these fuckers who had positions of power 10 years ago are saying the same bullshit that they did. Well, it's not even 10 years ago, like 19 years ago. Wow.
So his
David
statement,
Frum.
his statement is just like a Wikipedia article summary of what happened. There's like no opinion in this, other than he was important and he died.
Well, you know, because in private, what he actually said was like, "My old enemy."
I think
Metal Gear behind the scenes.
I think it's also funny. Kiri said this on Twitter earlier, but do people not realize that the point of being a general is to plan against your enemy's attack? Like, people are like so surprised that this person was like doing exactly that in his position and role as a general.
Yeah, people are like, he killed American soldiers. Like, he's on the other side of a war.
You notice one thing is like no one has ever stated the fact that he is actually a general in their. None of the mainstream news ones did.
Yeah, just a terrorist,
just by his name. Yeah, as though he's a non-state actor. When
America just took out the world's #1 bad guy.
Bad guy, yeah.
That most people probably haven't heard about.
No, nobody knew who he was a day ago, including myself, and now everybody's freaking out. And I think it's funny in relation to that article by CNBC. I remember there's this quote by Chomsky, which is basically that like any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. In this respect, regardless of whatever side, the quote unquote side they pretend that they're coming from, it's always going to be the same bullshit. And it's the same with the politicians. You can see that all of their bullshit social not deviances, but their disagreements on abortion or nationalization of healthcare, this or that, it goes to the dumpster when we start talking about war. Then everybody gets really excited.
Or is the health of the state?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I wouldn't give a name, but there's so many fucking old communists who did this shit too. Especially in regard, like when they're talking about America, how they say like, they're just pretending to be different, and then fucking anytime war starts, they're just the best of buds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, the official communist parties would always typically take the side of the state when something happened. And I know this isn't super relevant. Like the French Communist Party in 1968 allied with de Gaulle and the trade unions to repress the working class.
Because the fucking French Communist Party suck.
Well, yeah, and also most if not all of the official communist parties are remnants of the counter-revolution and the Bolshevization of all the foreign communist parties.
Oh, we know.
It's important that we got to repeat that for the people in the back.
Yeah.
Who have gotten a great view of history from, memes created by washouts from the PSL.
But it is a shame because all the good names have been taken, right? Like we got the Communist Party of the United States of America, that's taken. The Communist Party of America, that's taken. You know what I mean? Like,
and then you have the 12 international communist parties, which are all from like Italy.
Yeah.
International Communist Party, more like Insane Clown Posse. Am I right?
All right.
There was a band that was created, and they were left communists, and there was like Swedish death metal or something, and they made a song called like the exhuming of the invariant program.
And I think I heard that one.
Amadea Bordiga, and the legend is that they would reprint the LP every year, that there wasn't a split in the PCI, and they apparently never printed a single one.
Amazing.
This is unfortunately what happens when you have nerds who are the people who found political parties.
Yeah.
They're very, very passionate about finding the exact right answer and don't have a lot of social skills.
But also the methodology of the Bordigas can obviously be shown here in their lack of ability to cope, for lack of a better word, with the method of centralism in practice. They never got that from the historical experience, and that's why centralism in other organizations actually works, because you don't see them splitting every single year over minute theoretical differences over the invariant program or something like that.
Yeah, they just split over rape.
Oh no.
No, I mean, it's part of the same reason why like Trotskyist groups split. So long as Lev was alive, there was that kind of unifying force to keep all of the disagreements in line. The moment he kicks the bucket, a whole bunch of them start splitting over various political disagreements.
And there's some shit about aliens.
And that's why I think it was the ICC who said that the Fourth International wasn't a regroupment of like a regroupment around politics, but rather around Trotsky himself. And so, I mean, that's one of the main reasons why the Fourth International was one of the fucking the biggest failure of an attempt at an organization, especially because it wasn't really the time for an international to begin with. But that's why you have a million different type of Trotskyists now. Who, you know, there's one who believes that we should support Bernie Sanders, and there's one who may be closer to the positions of left communism. Like there's so much in between, and then you have the Leon Sedov Brigade who fight for ISIS.
I was about to mention that.
So there's a lot of that's a dialectic, yes.
Speaking of supporting ISIS, we should get back on track here.
Yeah,
just a bit.
Just a dad.
Just a
shitting on Trotsky.
Oh yeah, but as for I know the Iraqi Communist Party, I forget the acronym or what order it is.
ICP.
God damn it. But currently, I know they have a pretty decent role in the parliament, and they're allied with Al Sadir, which is a what's the term? Sectarian Iraqi nationalist who's been like he's for better or worse, he's put himself up as the forefront of these protests that are both anti-US and anti-Iran. So, I mean, he has the most to gain from this.
Yeah, like there's no way Iraq can like continue to have US soldiers. So the United States, I'm not quite sure how it works in Iraq anymore, but as long as we're not at war with the country that we're like have soldiers in. There's a thing called a status of forces agreement, and it's a agreement between the governments that allows our troops
to be on their soil, allows us to operate from there, and the terms in which we can do that. This is clearly a violation of the status of forces agreement.
Yeah, and so Iraq
you don't bomb another country without telling them first.
You also don't bomb the shit out of a fucking civilian airport.
Mm-hmm. So the U.S. is probably in violation of whatever status of forces agreement we have between us and Iraq. So I think that's probably more important than like the idea of a war with Iran, because I don't think unless Trump decides like, oh, we're gonna do it. We're going to just go in full dick out invasion of Iran.
Team America, fuck yeah.
Yeah, unless that happens, which he's never done before. So, you know, it could happen, obviously.
I mean, we've had some moments, but nothing like actually war. Like if you remember back in 2017 when the U.S. bombed that Syrian airport. But again, that wasn't really anything monumental. Yeah, everybody thought that we were on the brink of war again.
Yeah, but I think
it seems to be a pattern with Trump. There's a whole bunch, just bolt from the blue violence, and then nothing really follows up.
Yeah,
it's giving us blue balls.
But I think what's more interesting is whatever Iraq does. You know, it's more interesting to see how Iraq responds to this. I can't imagine that Iraqis are very happy with having their airports and streets randomly bombed by the country who's allegedly there to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the whole occupation of the embassy was about, was protests about U.S. bombings in the country.
I just checked, and this tweet from the Iraqi government says, the National Security Council condemns the U.S. attack and considers it a violation of Iraq's sovereignty and of the conditions governing the presence of U.S. forces in Iraq. The council also reviewed measures to protect yada yada yada. Yeah, so basically what you're saying is true. It violates the agreement.
It's kind of fucking wild we get our news from Twitter.
Yeah, I know. I was checking the Iraqi government website, and they just show their Twitter on the side.
And that's the main thing. Like, if say Trump does want to go full balls out into Iran, without Iraq being willing to act as a staging area, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Naval invasion into.
Yeah, that will. You guys remember that? I wonder if I think we might have talked about this on the podcast.
No beach, out of reach. No beach, out of reach.
You remember that? Okay. I can't remember what it's called, but it was like the war game, with the U.S. and definitely not Iran, and like it was the
Millennium Challenge.
Yeah, it was like red and blue or whatever, and fucking they just failed immediately because they didn't anticipate like asymmetrical warfare.
Yeah.
And then the general shit his pants. Like, no, you have to do it on my terms. They just spent $1 million just jerking themselves off.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are some like part of that. Like I feel like honor bound to defend at least part of that because it's a little more complex than that. They run these exercises like to get the troops to have training in specific circumstances. So like the whole point of having that the whole point of actually having troops out in the field is so that though they get experience like jumping out of planes into hot landing zones or advancing under fire or whatever. And so if your guy is like, no, I blew up your planes with whatever the Serbians with Serbian magic, then you can't have the guys jump out of the planes and they don't get to practice whatever. So I think
I know that, but I think it's really funny that they just lost immediately and they had to do it again.
Wait a minute. Didn't Iraq's prime minister resign like a month ago? I'm trying to remember.
Amid the protest, I'm not sure. I don't think so.
I think, there was some like reshuffling in the cabinet. I can't remember the specifics because in this accelerated news cycle, a month feels like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I remember a couple of years ago, or maybe less, but I was talking about a recent event that had happened. It was like only a month ago, and it was like, that's old news. And I was like, bro.
Bruh. Yeah.
It is kind of crazy to think that. Yeah, it really is just an accelerated news cycle with the amount of information that we're exposed to day by day that we can know that there was a flood in Sudan and also a bombing in Iraq.
I didn't even catch the Sudan thing.
No, I'm just making up an example.
Oh, okay.
Oh. I'm like, I mean, it's right on the Nile, but I mean, there's a flood in
Can we
Jaffa.
talk also for a moment about like the hyperbolic reaction that's in like the American public about anytime this sort of thing happens?
Oh,
I think it's kind of notable. Like anyone's on Twitter could remember that World War III was trending for a short time on Twitter.
I think it's still probably trending sometime.
It's less on the list, but this morning and last night, like it was up there really.
Right now it's just Trump, Iran, America, Iraq, some shit about
China.
basketball. There's Jesus in there.
Mine is Texas, Christmas, China, Amazon, Israel.
My favorite take of all was some person who was from an evangelical background talking about how, you don't want to. Please don't talk about, end times and prophecies and such.
I'm from an evangelical background, and I can say it's fucking crazy. Absolutely.
Insane.
And I think, there's definitely this self-centeredness about, people, some trying to, cope with the fact that there's a non-zero chance that they might be drafted and go off and die in some imperial struggle. But let's be perfectly honest, the people who would suffer the most in any war in the Middle East is people in Iraq and Iran.
Yep. It shows really the degree of separation that Americans have from any form of terror or violence on a military basis.
I mean, again, I'm inclined to be a little more. I'm inclined to be a little more like genial about this. I guess that might be the wrong word, but I think a lot of these people, if something's trending on Twitter, a lot of these people who are tweeting about it aren't like up on politics, right? So when something happens that shakes them into thinking about politics, I mean, they're only going to engage with it in as much as it is important to them.
Yeah, I don't mean to be
that
like
is true,
super
but I did see
centrist.
a lot of people who were, you could tell that they were political accounts who were.
Oh yeah.
I don't mean to be super centrist, but I am gonna say that the immediate first response for most people is obviously going to be what happens to me.
Yeah, you think about yourself first, generally.
True. Yeah, but going straight to World War III seems like going straight to World War III seems like a stretch to me.
Yeah, that's just
obviously
Twitter being hyperbolic.
I don't.
in general.
I don't think. I think this is actually a good movement on a discussion because I do want to talk about whether or not World War III is on the agenda. And as Shah Abbas said, there's really there's nothing that indicates that this would lead to World War III. It's kind of silly, especially the ruling class knows very well the reactions that it got from the working class 100 years ago during the first imperialist war, and also the reactions that it got in even though it was less so during the second imperialist war and after. It knows that if it throws humanity into another bloody crisis, an openly generalized imperialist war, then there's going to be a huge reaction from the working class internationally. And so I would probably not say at this point that World War III is on the agenda, but the problem always with capitalism is that war will always be on the table.
I want to say that now the fact that people are just so connected that I'd be even more worried about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can just fucking talk to anyone around the world.
Like what you said about talking to someone you knew in Iran. No one wants to go to war with people who they talk to on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can say that from my personal experience, the idea, I know I met people from Russia at school, and I talked to them, and the idea that my country has a policy of pointing nuclear weapons at them for shits and giggles is really, really offensive to me.
Yeah.
If you just talk to people from fucking anywhere around the world, you see how futile it all is.
It's a very simple and human thing. And I know it might sound kind of just silly at first, like you said, with just knowing somebody on Twitter, but I know a lot of people around the world, and just as you said, thinking about that possibility horrifies me.
There's a concept that came out of the space program called the overview effect of astronauts who, when they were out in space, particularly on the moon missions, could look back and see the entirety of the Earth in a single instance, and had this profound, almost religious experience where their perspective about what the world meant changed instantly, because they could look down, they see the entire world, and there's no borders on the world. They're just lines that are arbitrarily constructed, and you can't see them from space. You just see all of humanity there, vulnerable, clinging to the shell of this pale blue dot in space.
Mm-hmm.
And then half of them went on to become Republican senators when they got back.
Yep. Kind of sad.
Yep.
Yeah, it shows you how the human brain is great at compartmentalizing things.
This actually reminds me, I'm going to bring up Lenin, which is strange for me. Because I'm not a very Leninist type, but he had that one, article about when people are just brought together, and they when workers fraternize, just all the barriers just come down when they have to work together and talk together and stuff. And
there's a quote from Luxembourg which I can probably find in a second. Let me mute myself because my keyboard is fucking loud.
It reminds me of something Matt Christman said on Chapo, which is
great.
Oh, great. No, because he was talking about how the American system had broken down the bonds between workers, and that people in the U.S. were like the French peasantry who voted for Napoleon, to explain why people voted for Trump. I don't know if it's. I thought that was a weird take from Chapo.
I think there's definitely a factor of that, but capitalism has managed to undo its own coping mechanisms. So many people are being just kind of permanently locked out of prosperity and shoved into overcrowded apartment complexes.
Or just can't even get an apartment in the first place.
Those barriers between people. There's a real reason why younger people are much more left-wing, much more skeptical of traditional state and capitalist institutions, because they have failed them, and they see these people who are supposedly the enemy, the drug users, racial minorities,
petty criminals,
immigrants. These official enemies are not just abstractions to them; they are actual people.
Yeah, especially because we have to deal with it a lot more. We're being confronted with all these different contradictions within existing capitalist society. I found the quote: "The fraternization of the workers of the world is for me the highest and most sacred thing on earth. It is my guiding star, my ideal, my fatherland. I would rather forfeit my life than be unfaithful to this ideal."
Epic.
That's such a
She's
great
right.
quote, but I can only imagine it like being tweeted, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a very ironic age where any sincerity is kind of just a joke. But, that's for another discussion.
Yeah.
Which is ironic coming from me, who is a sarcastic shithead. But you'll get my point.
Iran.
I think the question we should address
Iran, yeah.
right now,
We
when
had
it
a
comes to
topic.
Iran,
Oh yes.
let's
Iran.
talk about. Okay, let's say the shit does hit the fan. There is an escalation of armed conflict in the Middle East. What is our job as communists?
We're the draft part.
It's
Posting.
shitposting on Twitter. Yeah.
I mean, at least. Sorry, you go ahead first.
So, as communists, the immediate duty is to have done what we have done for the past 100 years, which is simply put, look, there are two sides in this conflict, and both of them are bourgeois. There is a American bourgeoisie and there's an Iranian bourgeoisie, and both have the capability and continually brutally repress their workers and other workers abroad with militarization and bombings and terror. And we have to say very clearly that neither of these sides are communistic. By supporting them, we won't get anywhere, and that the only solution is the international destruction of all of the bourgeoisie internationally. And that kind of comes together in Lenin's theory of revolutionary defeatism, which self-proclaimed Leninists really like to forget because it's convenient. Because the Stalinists and the falsifiers are really their entire theory is based on defending the entire history of state capitalism and the counter-revolution. That is kind of their entire theory.
A lot of it's just shallow anti-Americanism.
I think there's a point to be
you have
made
an
with
inkling of correctness, but it doesn't go far enough.
I think there's a point to be made about revolutionary defeatism with in regards to basically how conflicts work in the modern day, at least with regards to America, how there's no risk at all for any American at home, no threat to their lives from Iran at all. But for Iranian citizens, there's this constant overhead, like, am I going to die today or something? So I think that, like, I don't know how you would apply revolutionary defeatism to that scenario in Iran and still be, like, productive to your own social and material, like,
That is
livelihoods.
It's
Yeah, so for all our Iranian listeners.
I'll two of them.
Yeah, I think it does definitely fall more on we have the greater responsibility being in the nation that is not going to be the one being bombed practically from orbit.
Well, I think that's one of the issues with revolutionary defeatism in my mind, is that it made a lot of sense in World War I which was a war that was devastating, but in some ways pretty low impact. Like, they didn't have strategic bombing, they didn't have they didn't have aerial bombing, and they didn't have like
there
the
was a
ability
lot of
to destroy
artillery
massive
bombings.
amounts of infrastructure and kill massive amounts of people.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously World War I killed a lot of people and destroyed a lot of infrastructure, but it was a little more difficult than it would be even 20 years later, even in like the 1940s.
I do not agree with that, and I'll tell you why if you want to complete your statement first.
Yeah, so what I mean is that I think we should be cognizant of changes that have occurred here, and that and this is something that I think is like one of the difficulties with like the approach to World War II, and I think the reason why so many communists supported the Second World War was that it's just so imminent to the experience
The stakes
of
are
existing.
different.
Yeah.
I think it's important to note that the theory of revolutionary defeatism started to only become applicable in the period of decadence following the First Imperialist War, or following 1914 into the Imperialist War. That's what actually made it complete. There's a reason why a communist supported the North in the Civil War and supported other sides strategically in imperialist conflicts beforehand, because there was something actually to be gained in those conflicts. But in the period of decadence, revolutionary defeatism must be a constant principle applied to these things strategically, because we can see that there's nothing to be gained further from any of these bourgeois conflicts, and that includes even if a populace is more susceptible to the destruction of themselves because of their government. If the government is weaker, it still requires the constant pushing onto revolutionary defeatism. You can look at even in World War I, the experience of the Russian proletariat, when the state had been completely destroyed. Basically, the economy was destroyed, and the provisional government was trying to restart the war effort after the series of revolutions that had happened. The Russian proletariat was adamant that a war should not continue, and this is the main reason why the Bolsheviks got so much support in 1917. It's because that they represented the interests of the working class. So I think even in cases where it looks dire, it looks awful, we still need to hammer down this very important principle of revolutionary defeatism, in hopes that communists abroad would also perpetuate this idea in their own organizations, respectively.
Now, whether they're listening to us is debatable.
when it comes to the first imperialist war,
by the way, just one more thing, not to interrupt. There's an organization called Internationalist Voice, which is an Iranian left communist organization, which also agrees with the principles of revolutionary defeatism. Basically, everything that I've just said. So it's not just us in the first world here repeating these principles when we're not susceptible to them. There are lots of organizations elsewhere in the world which are, by people or people who are much more susceptible to this are in them, who also spout these principles because they understand that this is the only solution.
Yeah, but that's how
Go ahead, Elliot.
So when it comes to revolutionary defeatism in the First World War, it emerges not only as a principle being adopted by communists, but as a phenomenon that emerged organically from the working class, particularly among soldiers. Because this was a conflict that wasn't a neat conflict where only soldiers were dying. In the case of French and Belgian workers, large percentages of their population were occupied by Imperial Germany, which subjected these occupied populations to a very brutal regime of anti-partisan warfare. They depopulated whole towns and cities in Belgium during the First World War of the adult male population out of the fear of partisans. And so they were killing people by the hundreds of, if not thousands, in many places, out of suspicion of being opposition to the occupation. In France, starvation and disease were getting widespread, particularly in occupied areas. And in Germany, it was arguably the worst of all of any of the powers, even probably almost as bad as in Russia because of the British blockade.
Oh, yeah.
Germany was not food self-sufficient. So the British blockade was literally starving the countries to death, slowly but surely. You had, during the turnip winter in 1916, 1917, people being reduced to eating food that had been meant for animal fodder, resulting in the mass destruction of the pig population in Germany, meaning that the famine just continued the next year because the main staple meat source, the population had to be culled because there was no fodder for it. In 1918, you had workers quite commonly just literally dying of starvation and pestilence on factories floors because they had just been worked too much and didn't get enough food. And amidst all this, the First World War ends not because of a resolute victory in the field by the Entente or because of the negotiation of politicians, but an act of spontaneous revolutionary defeatism by German soldiers and sailors. That is the part that is so often forgotten of the history of the First Imperialist War, is that this massive actions of mutiny and defiance broke out following basically, what happened in late 1918 is that the German bourgeoisie knew that the war was over. They could not continue the war for much longer. They were going to be defeated. To preserve their honor, particularly the German Naval High Command wanted to send all of their ships that had been spending most of the war in docks, just languishing, out for one last blaze of glory, to fight out one last fight with the British Navy and see what happens. When the German sailors got wind of this, they said, you know what? We're not dying for your honor. And it spread. People were starting to walk away from the front lines. Soldiers were mutinying, forming soldiers' councils. And it spread throughout every city in Germany, where workers said, you know what? The war is basically over. Why are we going to continue this farce for any longer?
And I want to respond to that because I do agree with revolutionary defeatism, and I'm not saying that it's like oh, Iranians should whatever support the Iranian government. No, I mean that's ridiculous. But the point that I want to that I think is a sticking point is that was the First World War, and there was a Second World War, and in that Second World War, states successfully mobilized massive militaries, saw relatively low levels of desertion or and I think almost relative to, for example, what happened towards the end of World War I, very, very smaller amounts of these kinds of soldiers' councils and mutinies. I don't think there were very many large-scale mutinies, except among colonial troops. I think there was a couple of mutinies among Indian troops. And there were a few defections from like Japanese troops to the Chinese Communist Party, and there were a surprising number of defections from the German army to the Soviets. But
I think, that's definitely true, and that is where I think where revolutionary defeatism as a strategy meets its limit.
But yeah, yes, I mean, revolutionary defeatism definitely emerged and made sense at that time. But I think when we look at these things that, maybe from a moral and certainly from an ethical perspective and from a moral perspective, yeah, we should oppose the war. But from a practical perspective, when we think of a policy that should be taken up by communists, we're talking about something that should be taken up because it works. I mean, no one's trying to make doomed moral stands here. We're not trying to you don't win on moral victories. And I think it's worth considering that this is a position to take that has limits. I'm not saying we shouldn't take it, but it's a position that has limits to it. And especially in the case of an imperial war between one extremely large and powerful country with a mostly volunteer army, against another country that, for example, doesn't, like Iran. The idea that World War I conditions would emerge and would lead to these kinds of mutinies doesn't, I think, hold very much water. It doesn't seem. I guess I could be argued to see the point, but I don't see how this works out. You know what I mean?
No one here has implied that the conditions of any imperialist war now would be in any way similar conditions to that of the first imperialist war.
No, and I don't want to give the impression that I'm saying that.
Right, and so the point that I was trying to make, which is that this theory of revolutionary defeatism is still applicable, I think is in some ways even more applicable. It would be kind of, I would say, reductive to say that. What was I going to say? Fuck. Just edit this part out. Let me think 1 second. Having a poop moment.
We're never going to edit these out.
You don't? When I used to edit this, I used to be really meticulous with my editing.
Yeah.
Like I would download the video, the audio files and edit out, like if somebody was just like laughing in the middle of nowhere, I would just like edit it out. But okay, anyways.
Freeform it now.
Freeform jazz, or should we say freeform scat?
We go to the Star Wars one.
Let's go out of pop pop. I really like this podcast, but there's a part about 40 minutes in where they just start.
Degenerate.
We found your thought.
I think I agree with Bang, though.
So my original point was that I think it's reductive to say that we have to take this, quote unquote, as communists, a practical approach. Of course, we should be practical, but I think it's we shouldn't muddy the waters, if you get what I mean, right?
Yeah.
A lot of quote unquote self-proclaimed communists love to talk about practicality when they're intentionally sacrificing, or maybe unintentionally sacrificing, their principles in order to fulfill this necessity of quote unquote practicality. And so when we're talking about the support for one's state's defeat, one's country's defeat, the principle of revolutionary defeatism, we need to always keep in mind that the principle of revolutionary defeatism is important in really any circumstance. Hoping that, well, obviously, the a dictatorship of the proletariat in Iran would be much better than a theocracy, and I know we all agree that. I'm not trying to put any words in anybody's mouth.
Oh, we all do.
But the question is, of course, what is the roadmap to that? How is it possible? And I know at this point, a lot of things really seem hopeless. That we're kind of we are reaching a sort of a stalemate, if you will, or even we're far beyond that. But just a year ago, less, there was mass protests in Iran itself from the workers in Khuzestan of Haftepe, who destabilized the entire region and formed strike committees, and beyond that, on the way to workers' councils. Mm-hmm. So just always remind yourself as a communist that
these things do happen.
These things do happen, that they are possible, and to never underestimate or overestimate the capability of the working class internationally, because this is just something that's possible.
A little anecdote from history that's often forgotten. During the last major American foreign involvement before the current one in Vietnam, it was this absolute ominous shambles for the U.S. military that resulted in this breakdown of morale and order of the U.S. military, not just the sections that were actively deployed in Vietnam, but also throughout the entire chain of command, particularly during the defeat. There were actual soldier councils formed in the U.S. Army. They were stuff that the U.S. Army tried to co-opt, but there were actual councils formed as an institution. Yeah. I first learned about them. When I was in middle school. I was reading some stuff about back in my Tom Clancy reading days. I read one of his nonfiction books where he did interviews with one of the chief commanders in Desert Storm, and he talked about how much he, as an officer, hated these institutions because they were basically to give enlisted and NCOs a means of airing their grievances towards officers.
Mm.
Pretty much not, for any reason to actually redress them, but to prevent soldiers from rolling grenades into their officers' tents.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the hope of
course.
Yeah, of course. it's still the hope of communists internationally. And I know in a lot of respect there is a justifiable hatred of the United States military, but we have to separate the military, like with the ranks itself within the military, officers and everybody below that, and like for instance the police force. A lot of people make comparisons between the American military and the police, when really I would say the police, as soon as you become a police officer, you're immediately over the working class legally. Mm-hmm. In the military, you are sent away abroad, not even in contact with that working class. Maybe you're over other members of the working class there because you have a gun, but it's really very different. And so of course the United States military is something which needs to be dismantled, but our hope as communists is that all members of their militaries should turn on their respective commanding officers, and form soldiers' councils and things like that.
Well, and I think
our hope is always that.
So my point is that this blatant or like fierce hatred of the entirety of the United States military is really fetishistic. And also, it's important to note that a lot of the war crimes that come out of the United States military are actually from the officers. Like there was a recent case where there was an officer in Iraq who had committed war crimes a couple of years ago, and all of the soldiers in his platoon, or I don't know how big it was.
The Navy SEAL, or
are you
maybe
referring to Gallagher, the guy who recently got
pardoned for his fucking war?
No. I think it was a different. Maybe it was a different guy. I think it was probably smaller. But anyways, in his group, a lot of the soldiers reported to higher ups that he was doing these things for years, and nobody said a word. Nothing changed. So there is a degree of separation between these two different entities, if you will, within the United States military. So I don't find it useful ever to just say, U.S. military, like as a whole, evil, we kill all soldiers.
Still huge resentment among the enlisted and NCOs and the U.S. military towards the professional officer class.
Yeah. That is an important thing to remember, is that for a lot of people, so like if you're not really like into military stuff, the way it works is you have enlisted soldiers, which are E whatever.
E1, 3, 5.
Yeah.
Typically.
Mm-hmm.
And so enlisted soldiers are like your privates, and they do like most privates, corporals, specialists, whatever, and they do most of the manual work. Although there's
the literal grunt work, that's why they're called grunts.
I mean, that's why they're called grunts. And then you have the non-commissioned officers, which are like staff sergeants and sergeant majors and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and those are people who did their time as enlisted and then got promoted.
Yeah, but so an officer is a different thing from an NCO. So to be an officer, you have to have a college degree, and you go in and you get leadership training, and your job is basically to sort of like corral these people. And there's a little more like it's more complicated than this, but that's a general gist of the situation. So what you end up happening is that people who go in as officers are very heavily invested in the actual situation of the military. Officers tend to be educated. They tend to be they definitely make a lot more money. They have nicer housing facilities, and they do different jobs. There's the rear echelon motherfucker meme is a thing for a reason. And I don't want to give this impression that officers are like counter-revolutionary bourgeois, while enlisted soldiers are
the true
true proletariat. But there's very much a divide, and I think one interesting thing to remember is also that compared to the average American, like the U.S. military is incredibly like diverse. There's a lot more it's just brown and black people are. I can't put this any cruder than this, but brown and black people are overrepresented in the military, and those people tend to have the same political positions as other non-military people. So that there is just because there's this idea that the U.S. military is like everyone in the U.S. military is like a Navy SEAL with a coffee company, but that's not true. It's a lot more. There's a lot of people who
got duped by their high school recruiter.
Yeah, well, that or made the decision, because you do get health care.
Yeah,
and
the
you get the GI Bill.
The poverty draft.
And so the volunteer nature.
So the two biggest costs to people in the United States today, healthcare and college, are helped by being in the military. So there's a lot of people who go into the military for that reason. There's a lot of people who go into the military for a lot of different reasons. And I think saying like, "Oh, you join the military because you want to go with a gun and kill brown people." Sorry, I'm going to wrap up soon, but is I think wrong. And one of the things I remember very strongly was meeting a guy who was in the military in like 2014 when there was the Ebola crisis in Liberia, and this guy was very, very proud of the fact that he brought up to me that he was very, very proud of the fact that he had been in that group of troops who had deployed to Liberia to build hospitals, to help people, to build, So I think there's a lot of to help fight the disease. So I think that the idea that you join the U.S. military because you're a bloodthirsty imperialist. A lot of people join it because they legitimately want to make the world a better place and are just, I mean, most people. Why do people volunteer for the Red Cross? It's not like the Red Cross is actually helping people, anymore than the military, right?
It's easy to be duped because the whole institution is built around duping people based on their better natures.
Yeah, it's a terrorist organization with benefits.
Yeah, I mean,
and everyone loves their benefits.
Find that a lot of people do actually want to help each other. They just don't know how. And I don't mean that in the whole let's all hold hands stupid shit, but you know what I mean. There's a lot of. I'm not gonna be able to put this in words correctly. Just please continue. Oh,
all right. I was thinking we could transition to say a hypothetical Iran war happens. What are the consequences for the differing countries and peoples in the regions?
Does anyone hear
I feel like that's too much of a reach. We really don't know.
I
don't think it would be really a productive discussion.
Knows anything about military tactics other than pop culture or?
Yeah,
I would consider myself most qualified to give generalities, but there are so many different cases.
Yeah.
I mean, what
it
exactly
depends,
is going to happen?
Yeah. I mean, one thing you can say is that either way, the Gulf states not going to be having a good time.
Yeah. Well, they were doomed from the moment they first found oil.
Yep.
This whole story was from the foundation of the Arabian American Oil Company. They were
fucked.
They were completely fucked, and this was an inevitability.
Yeah.
I think though it does bring up important strategies for organizing. I know a lot of people who are most active in the left and in the communist movement right now are people who are high school and college age, and those are the people who are most intensely targeted by military recruiters.
Yeah. I would say also that I would say the people who call themselves left communists that are known to us are mostly those just on social media. There's a whole lot of older. There's a large older generation of left communists that exist elsewhere in the world that are just not on social media because of generational differences.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a huge gap in the ICC, for example, of people who are literally on what's it called? Pensioners? No, not life support. Who are pensioners or are nearing retirement age through 60s through 80s. So
the young blood who are recent recruits.
Yeah, exactly, or integration or what have you. So there's a big gap, and I think it is very interesting that there aren't a lot of Gen X communists. When you think of, or at least when I think of communists, I either think pretty young, millennial-ish, and then older.
Yeah, that's been my experience in real life.
Yep.
All of the communists I knew were either people my age or younger, or people who were retirement age.
Yeah. So
it's kind of strange.
I think a lot of the Gen X guys, they got into rebellion, but not it just didn't have that economic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think communism wasn't cool for them because they grew up with. I'm completely spitballing. This is bad sociology, but they did. This was the generation this was the generation that grew up with the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, for them, the fall of the Eastern Bloc was the end of communism. This is the definitive proof that communism doesn't work.
Yeah,
which is obviously one of the greatest lies in history. But
you wouldn't need to keep having people claiming that communism is dead if communism was actually dead.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you wouldn't have fucking everyone's every ghoul on social media be look at this, a liberal. Communism doesn't work.
It's funny because Fukuyama himself, and for those who don't know, Francis Fukuyama wrote, or he doctored the idea of the end of history, the end of history narrative. A couple of years ago, he even said himself that he thinks we should have socialism. So I think
he obviously meant it in the Stockholm.
Obviously, but that in and of itself,
Fukuyama was always.
he believed neoliberal capitalism was the end of history. And so even him saying that social democracy is something that we should strive for is ironic.
I get a real kick out of the idea that this is just like how things should be forever.
Oh
Like,
yeah, it's just like so arrogant.
Like, oh yeah, this is definitely what future generations are going to want to.
Yeah.
The worst part about it is like, even for like the boomer generation who are most enamored with the existing evils, things aren't great.
Do you ever read Death of a Salesman? Come on, guys.
Like, things are continuing to get worse every year, and they hide this through very sophisticated statistical methods so that the official record says, well, yeah,
Like a
median
line goes
incomes
up.
Everything's
doing
going
just
good.
fine. But like,
By the way, purely on a literary basis, Death of a Salesman sucks. I fucking hate that book.
Probably
Alright, we're all
hate
gonna fight
Last Jedi too.
Oh my god, let's not into that.
It's high
It's
culture, all right.
like, you know, everything is measured based off of, you know, cost of living increases, and they doctor the metric that they use to adjust for inflation on things based off of what they consider to be quality improvements. So, like, for example, if housing prices are increasing, they'll measure, like, well, is the average house bigger? And then they'll adjust prices accordingly and say, oh, look, housing prices are stable. People's rents aren't actually going up when they in fact are. And so, you know,
Well,
people...
They'll even like do the metric of quality of housing, which is one really hard to quantify.
Yeah, marble countertops.
Yeah.
You got the only apartment available in your area was the one with the luxury marble countertops that you had to pay an extra $100 a month for.
Busting my brains on these marble countertops, totally worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I have these nice soft carpeted countertops.
Well, carpeted countertop.
Carpeted countertops.
No one will ever bash their head on this baby.
Ugh, I hate that idea.
I don't actually have carpeted countertops.
Good, I didn't think so.
I'd be mad.
It's like the most like it's the moment when you enter into a house with carpeted countertops that you realize like you got into the bad dimension. You've entered the back rooms.
My buddy was
kitchen with a carpet,
legit.
like
He
anywhere.
was renting a house that had a carpeted kitchen.
Oh my god.
I hope you don't spill anything on the floor.
Gotta look that
Yeah.
up.
It's trying very hard not to.
Marble
You
countertops per capita.
You try cutting like a tomato and your fucking carpet's ruined. You gotta do one.
Iran is third world because it doesn't have any marble countertops.
How many boomer mansions does Iran have? How many suburban developments does Tehran have? Probably a lot, actually.
All right, everybody check the contributors channel.
Tehran suburbs. Oh, this is a really good podcast. But at about 45 minutes in, they started talking about marble countertops in Tehran.
Well, we are stationed in Tehran after all.
Oh yes, we are. I'm looking out. I'm in the room with all of you guys.
Yeah, we're
I'm
trying to get an
looking out.
apartment.
We're at
Beautiful.
the Press TV headquarters right now.
I see thousands of civilians right now shouting "Death to America" in Farsi. It's actually quite beautiful. Oh,
Yeah,
I just got
parking in an alleyway.
guys. I just got the money for my to my bank account from George Soros for our flight back.
Jason Unruh is like right next door.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton has just gave me $10.
I could live in Tehran.
It's a pretty nice city.
I think my favorite
could not
hoax
find
story
it.
to come out of this whole thing was someone fired off a tweet saying that there were reports of celebrations about the death of Qassem Soleimani
Oh yeah.
that was at like 5 or 6 a.m. local time. You know,
I
people
get up in the
definitely
morning just to
tweets.
celebrate my.
Oh my god. That
I'm
reminds me.
seeing thousands of cars on the freeway here. These people are ecstatic about the death of Qassem Soleimani.
That reminds me of this clip I saw the other day. Yeah, it was this old '90s crime movie, and this basically this quote unquote gangster tries robbing this old dude. I forgot the actor, and his name was like the Giddler or something. The gangster's name. And then this dude pulls out like this giant ass 44 and just pops him from across the street. And then everyone looks out their window and they start cheering.
Is this like and everybody
His name was
clapped?
Albert Einstein.
Yeah. No, literally, everyone started clapping and cheering. Just this white dude gunned down a black man in a majority black neighborhood.
Yeah, just fucking shot him, and everybody's not like shocked at the blood on the ground. Some guy just got killed.
And there was like tangerine-sized hole in his chest.
Oh my god!
Yeah.
I love how movies are written by people who have like not seen anyone die.
Yeah.
Like, or how people react.
The dude pretty much ragdolled.
Like Gmod.
Yep. See if I can find
we cut the part where we laugh about the idea of people dying from this. Please.
Yeah. This one's definitely going to need a little bit more editing post.
It's a good thing we got a new editor.
Oh, yeah.
So we should probably wrap up now.
Let's do that.
So.
Yeah.
I didn't start. This isn't my podcast.
All right.
Okay.
This has been Radio Free Strasbourg.
Let's wrap up. As we wrap up, let's talk about like what is actually like what we covered of interest here.
Did we cover anything?
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of people are looking at like heightening tensions in the Middle East, the potential of war with Iran. I mean, and realistically, I think
don't forget the marble countertops per capita.
And the marble countertops.
Oh, of course, that's the most important.
I think it's also important to like point out that like this has happened before. We've been here before with the tankers and stuff. So it's like North Korea shelling an island or whatever. Like, yeah, there's a potential for war, but and watch the next week. We're gonna be fully balls deep in war with Iran. But I mean, so far we haven't really gone to war with Iran yet. So I think it's important to like.
It's basically a fucking coin flip whether nothing happens or everything happens.
And it's not gonna be World War III. But it is a new turn in how the U.S. is like deals with the world, and that's interesting.
And honestly, anyways,
either way,
a
the
ton
global
of poor people are
proletariat
going to
gets
get killed.
fucked.
A lot of poor people are going to get killed in Iraq and Iran, and it's actually pretty fucking tragic.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
You know,
so
our
don't forget about our brave American soldiers.
Oh yeah, hoorah!
Hoorah!
My big guys in like in so many plates that they're legally classified as an armored vehicle, stumbling through the marshes in the Persian Gulf.
Mountains of
The
Iran,
last time I was on here and we talked about truth, we were just making fun of them the entire time.
Great wrap up, guys.
All right, great wrap up.
We did it. All right.
All right. Thank you very much. We send you beautiful greetings from Tehran and lots of love from the grave of former Al-Quds.
Have fun, Americans. Or as we'll call it in a week, New Iran.
I don't know any Persian. That's why I'm very confused in this town.
All right.
Adios.
But it was nice of Ayatollah Khomeini to give us all this money in this studio.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to do an ad read for
Skullshaver.eu.
And if you're in the market for a VPN, consider NordVPN.
Follow me on Twitter.
I need a VPN, a mattress, and some boner pills, and I'm trying to like.
She said, "This is a really bad outro. Can we just all say something at the same time? Let's all say follow our Twitter accounts and then say the Twitter account." Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1.